I was helping customers at my boutique when the text came through. A message from my husband, Mark. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already emptied our joint account. Ha ha ha. I stared at the screen, letting the words sink in. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't falter as I continued helping Mrs. Peterson pick out scarves. The only sign that my husband of 12 years had just destroyed our marriage via text was a slight tightening around my eyes. Once Mrs. Peterson left, her purchase wrapped in our signature silver paper, I calmly typed my response. Good luck. My name is Claire, and at 38, I just received the most heartless goodbye imaginable. But while Mark probably imagined me sobbing over his grand exit, I was calmly locking up my boutique for the day. The signs had been there for months. The late nights he claimed were work, which never added up to the deposits in our account. The sudden password changes on his phone, the new gym routine, the wardrobe overhaul, a desperate attempt to relive his youth. 3 months ago, I found a dinner receipt for 2 at a pricey restaurant on a night he said he was working late. That same night, I opened a separate bank account. A week later, when he suggested we combine our accounts for convenience, I agreed, smiling all the while. I transferred my savings into that new account. As for the joint one, he emptied it, but there was just enough left to avoid suspicion. 2 months' worth of regular deposits. The rest, safely tucked away, along with a detailed record of every suspicious transaction he'd made over the past year. Then my phone buzzed again. Don't bother begging. Melissa and I are leaving tomorrow. I'll send for my things later. Melissa, the new receptionist at his office. I'd met her at the company Christmas party. She laughed too loudly at his jokes and touched his arm when she thought no one was watching. She was young, naive, and probably thought she was something special. I didn't reply to his message. Instead, I called my lawyer, the one I'd consulted 2 months ago when I found the hotel charges on our credit card statement. It's time, I said calmly. He's made his move, my lawyer replied. The papers are ready, and I'll file them first thing tomorrow. Do you want him served in Miami? No rush, I typed back. Let him think he's won first. Another message from Mark arrived. I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy. My little shop, the thriving boutique I had built from the ground up, the one that now earned more than his middle management job ever did, and whose profits I had meticulously kept separate from our joint finances. I smiled, picturing the certified letters waiting for him in Miami. Let him relish his brief moment of triumph. I spent that evening in our house, my house, inherited from my grandmother, still in my name despite Mark's constant suggestion to add him to the deed. Another decision that had worked out well. While organising the paperwork for my lawyer, I found our wedding album. Mark looked so different back then, before his midlife crisis turned him into a parody of himself. These days, he wore shirts that clung to his softening middle, tried to fit in with the 20-somethings at his office, and used slang that felt ridiculous coming from a 45-year-old man. My phone buzzed again, more condescending texts from him. I've been planning this for months. Melissa understands me in ways you never could. You'll be fine. Maybe you'll find someone your own age. I've already told my family. They agree we grew apart. It's nobody's fault. I screenshot every single message, adding them to my evidence folder. Let him dig his hole even deeper. My lawyer would be thrilled with his casual admission of premeditation and his gleeful announcement about draining our joint account. Then, the last message caught my attention. By the way, I used the joint card to book our flights and hotel. Consider it my parting gift. LOL. Perfect. I called the credit card company. Mrs. Harrison speaking. I need to report fraudulent charges and cancel a card immediately. Certainly, ma'am. Could you identify the charges? 2 first-class tickets to Miami, Booked today. Hotel charges at the Royal Palm. Also, I need to remove my husband as an authorized user. Do you have documentation of the fraud? I forwarded the text messages from Mark, admitting to using our joint card to book travel with his girlfriend after draining our bank account. The representative's tone remained professional, but I could sense her satisfaction as she processed the cancellation. Mark and Melissa would arrive at the airport tomorrow to find their tickets invalid and their hotel reservation cancelled. My phone buzzed again. Don't worry about the house. I'll let you stay there until you find something smaller. I actually laughed out loud at that one. Did he really think he had any claim to my grandmother's house? Had his ego grown so large that he'd forgotten whose name was on the deed? Another message came through. I know the shop means a lot to you. We can work out a fair payment for your half. My half of my business that I had built, funded and maintained by myself, while he complained about my long hours and dismissed it as my hobby. I poured a glass of wine, the good stuff I had been saving for a special occasion. This definitely qualified. Tomorrow Mark would face some harsh truths about property law and separate assets, but tonight I was going to enjoy the peace and start planning my next steps. The morning brought a flood of increasingly angry texts from Mark. What did you do to our credit card? The airline won't honour our tickets, and the hotel cancelled our reservation. Answer me. I silenced my phone and headed to my boutique. Fridays were always the busiest days, and I had a new shipment of designer handbags to unpack. Life goes on even when your husband runs off with a receptionist young enough to be his daughter. Around noon, his mother called. Claire, dear, Mark told us everything. He says you've been so controlling that you drove him away. Now he says you're being vindictive, causing problems with his travel plans. I put her on speaker as I arranged a window display. Did he mention emptying our joint account and using the credit card to book tickets for him and his girlfriend? There was silence on the other end. Well, he said you left him no choice, that you'd been cold and distant. Barbara, I have his texts, I said. Would you like me to read them to you? The one where he bragged about taking our money, or maybe the one where he mocked my age? Another pause. He did seem a bit cruel, she said. I told him that text was inappropriate. I appreciate the call, Barbara. I've always liked you, but I think it's best if we end this conversation now. My lawyer has advised minimal contact with Mark's family during the proceedings. Proceedings already? She asked, sounding taken aback. Goodbye, Barbara. By late afternoon, Mark's sister Amanda had started spreading family gossip through mutual friends. Apparently, Mark and Melissa were stuck at a budget motel near the airport, their Miami dream temporarily derailed. He tried using his personal credit cards, but those had been maxed out for months, a red flag I had noticed. My lawyer called with an update. The emergency hearing is scheduled for Monday. Given his admission of emptying the joint account and the credit card fraud, we're in a strong position to freeze all remaining assets. Has he been served yet? I asked. Not yet, but he'll get the papers at his new motel address. By the way, his girlfriend's social media is providing excellent evidence. She'd been posting about their adventure all day, including some choice comments about me. I couldn't help but smile, thinking of my own neatly organised documentation, a year's worth of suspicious charges, hotel receipts and text messages that proved premeditation. Mark had been so fixated on his grand escape that he never considered I might have been watching, waiting and preparing. My phone buzzed again with another message from him. You think you're so smart, but I've made copies of all the boutique's financial records. Half of that business is mine. I forwarded the message to my lawyer, adding it to the growing file of Mark's mistakes. Let him learn the hard way about separate assets and business ownership. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being prepared. The emergency hearing on Monday went exactly as I had hoped. Mark showed up in his new youthful wardrobe, designer jeans that were far too tight for his age, and a blazer that screamed midlife crisis. Melissa waited outside, her youth painfully evident under the harsh courthouse lighting. My lawyer presented our evidence methodically. Mark's gleeful text about draining our account, his credit card fraud, and the documented history of hidden expenses, each piece carefully collected over months of quiet observation. Your Honour, Mark's hastily hired lawyer said, my client admits to some rash decisions, but Mrs. Harrison's actions have been vindictive and calculating. Calculating, my lawyer countered. You mean prudent. My client protected her separate assets and kept detailed records of her husband's suspicious behaviour. That's not vindictive. That's smart business. The judge reviewed my documentation, the separate property deed to the house, the boutique, and the corporation papers, all in my name only. The careful separation of business and personal finances that Mark had always complained about. Mr. Harrison, the judge addressed him directly, you admitted via text to deliberately emptying a joint account and using shared credit cards to fund a trip with your girlfriend. Do you deny this? Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I was just trying to make a clean break, he muttered, by committing financial fraud. The judge raised an eyebrow. And now you're claiming rights to property that is clearly separate from marital assets. The business had grown during our marriage, and Mark's lawyer tried once more. My client is entitled to the business. It was established before the marriage. My lawyer immediately interrupted. Mrs. Harrison maintained strict separation of business and personal finances throughout. We have documentation of every penny invested and earned. I watched Mark's face as reality began to sink in. He had thought this would be easy. Empty the accounts, run off with his girlfriend, and maybe claim half my business in the divorce. He never understood my insistence on keeping things separate. He had mocked my meticulous bookkeeping as obsessive. The court found sufficient evidence of financial misconduct. The judge announced that all shared assets would be frozen pending final dissolution. Mark was ordered to return any funds removed from joint accounts within 24 hours. But Mark protested. We spent it all. The judge cut him off. Then I suggest you find a way to replace it. Mr. Harrison, the judge continued, the court takes a very dim view of using shared credit cards to fund adventures with a paramour. Outside the courthouse, I heard Melissa asking Mark about their Miami plans. His response was drowned out by the sound of my heels clicking confidently across the marble floor, heading back to the business he had never respected or understood. The next few weeks saw Mark becoming increasingly desperate. He tried claiming the boutique had been his idea, remembering how he had invested money in its early days. He even suggested he had been my business partner all along. His claims were quickly disproven by my meticulous records. My lawyer observed that Mark was clearly getting desperate. His girlfriend's social media showed they were now staying in her studio apartment. Apparently, living on a receptionist's salary wasn't the glamorous escape Mark had imagined. Mark's family began reaching out. Their tone was noticeably different from their initial accusations. We had no idea, his sister Amanda admitted. He told us you were cold and controlling, that he needed to escape. But then we saw his texts, the way he bragged about taking your money. That's not the brother I thought I knew. His mother called again, this time in tears. The things he said about your age, about replacing you with someone younger. I raised him better than that. I thought I did. I let their calls go to voicemail. Their support might have meant something weeks ago, but now it felt like rats deserting a sinking ship. The boutique thrived, ironically boosted by local gossip about my situation. Women began coming in specifically to show support, often leaving with far more than they had planned to buy. One customer confided while purchasing a designer handbag. I thought he'd take everything in the divorce. Men like that never expect us to be smarter than them. My phone buzzed occasionally with texts from Mark. His tone swung between anger and manipulation. You've ruined everything. I never meant to hurt you. You'll regret being so vindictive. Can't we work something out? That business would be nothing without my support. I forwarded every message to my lawyer without responding. Let him dig his hole even deeper. Let him dig his hole deeper through the grapevine. I heard Melissa was starting to have second thoughts. Apparently, sharing a studio apartment with a middle-aged man who couldn't even afford his own place wasn't the romantic adventure she had imagined. The age gap that had seemed so exciting during their secret hotel meetings felt different under the harsh light of reality. She posted about toxic relationships and learning from her mistakes yesterday. During an update call, my lawyer mentioned she had removed her relationship status that morning. I almost felt sorry for Mark. Almost. But then I remembered the cruel haha after he told me he had emptied our account. The casual cruelty in his comments about my age, the way he assumed I'd be helpless without him. Instead of pity, I felt something else. Pride. Pride in my foresight, my quiet strength, and my ability to protect myself while he underestimated me. The final divorce hearing painted a very different picture from Mark's imagined triumph. Gone was his cocky attitude, replaced by barely concealed panic. Melissa was noticeably absent. She'd moved on to a co-worker her own age, according to office gossip. Mark had shown up in his old clothes. The designer wardrobe apparently returned to help repay the joint account he'd emptied. His lawyer looked exhausted, probably from trying to find loopholes in my documented separation of assets. Your Honour, Mark's lawyer attempted one last time. Despite the separate property documentation, my client contributed to the growth of his wife's business through moral support. My client protected her separate assets and maintained detailed records of her husband's suspicious behaviour, my lawyer interrupted. That's not moral support, that's smart business. The judge had clearly seen enough. The final settlement reflected my careful planning. I kept my house, my business, and my separate assets. Mark got his personal possessions and his car, which was worth less than he owed on it. You've destroyed me, he hissed as we left the courthouse. I'll have to move back in with my parents. No, Mark, I replied. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure you couldn't destroy me, too. His mother was waiting outside, ready to drive him to her house, his new home. At 45, the irony of his situation wasn't lost on anyone. The man who had mocked my age was now living in his childhood bedroom while I continued running my successful business. You planned this all along, he accused. You knew this would happen. No, I answered. I just paid attention, and unlike you, I understood the value of keeping good records. His mother stepped between us. That's enough, Mark. You've embarrassed yourself enough already. As they walked away, I heard her start in on him. Honestly, what were you thinking? A 20-year-old emptying bank accounts, sending those horrible texts? I watched them disappear into the parking lot, feeling nothing but relief. Mark had thought he was writing the ending to our story with that cruel text. Instead, he had merely set my carefully laid plans in motion. My phone buzzed, not with texts from Mark, but with notifications of new orders from my boutique's website. Life was moving forward, just not in the direction he'd imagined. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my boutique had expanded to a second location. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Mark struggled to rebuild his life, the little shop he had dismissed was thriving. I had hired 3 new employees and launched an online store that was gaining traction nationally. News of Mark's situation trickled back through mutual acquaintances. He'd tried dating apps but found women his age weren't interested in a middle-aged man living with his parents. Younger women, having heard about his history through office gossip, steered clear. Melissa had apparently warned her friends about him, sharing screenshots of his desperate attempts to win her back after she left. His career had suffered too. The company's HR department had launched an investigation into his relationship with a subordinate, resulting in a formal reprimand. The promotion he had been expecting went to someone else, someone who didn't have a history of inappropriate relationships with the reception staff. He tried to claim age discrimination. Amanda told me during an unexpected visit to the boutique, he said they were punishing him for dating someone younger. HR just added that complaint to his file. I was surprised to see his sister in my store, but her presence spoke volumes about how thoroughly Mark had alienated his own family. "I know we didn't support you at first," she admitted, running her fingers over a silk scarf. "He played the victim so well. But watching how he handled everything, how he acted afterward, I'm ashamed we ever believed him." My lawyer kept me updated on Mark's continued attempts to challenge the divorce settlement. Each petition was denied, his claim of unfair distribution dismissed based on the evidence of his own actions. He even tried arguing that his text about emptying the account was just a joke. My lawyer told me, laughing, the judge asked if "ha-ha" made theft less illegal. The success of the boutique brought unexpected validation. Local business magazines wanted to feature my story, not as a scorned wife, but as a savvy businesswoman who had protected her interests. Young entrepreneurs started seeking my advice on keeping business and personal finances separate. "The best protection is preparation," I told one young woman who reminded me of Melissa. "Always trust your instincts." Mark's mother called occasionally, usually after he'd done something particularly self-destructive. He'd tried online gambling, hoping for a quick fix to his financial problems. He got involved in a pyramid scheme promising fast returns. Each attempt to recover his former lifestyle only dug him deeper into trouble. "I don't know where we went wrong with him," she sighed during one call. "His father and I offered to help him get back on his feet if he'd just take responsibility for his actions, but he's still blaming everyone else. You, Melissa, his company, the judge." I listened politely but maintained my distance. Their family drama wasn't my problem anymore. My life had moved forward, filled with plans for a third boutique location and possible expansion into luxury accessories. The only reminder of Mark's impact on my life was a framed screenshot hanging in my office. His final text before I blocked his number: "Have fun with your little shop. At least it'll keep you busy in your old age." Below it sat my latest business award, proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding on your own terms. 1 year after the divorce, I hosted a grand opening for my third boutique location. The event attracted local media, but the story they wanted to tell wasn't about my failed marriage. It was about a successful businesswoman expanding her brand. Mark's betrayal had become nothing more than a mere footnote in my success story. During the event, Melissa unexpectedly walked in. She looked younger than ever. Or maybe I just felt that much stronger. She shifted uncomfortably, clutching her purse like a shield. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I believed everything he told me about how you were cold and controlling, how you didn't support his dreams. Then, I watched him try the same manipulation tactics on me when things got tough." I continued arranging a display of designer sunglasses. "Those weren't his dreams, Melissa. They were escapes. There's a difference." "I know that now," she paused before adding. "He tried to move in when you froze the accounts. He thought my studio apartment would be temporary. After 2 weeks of him complaining about the size of my closet and suggesting I take out a loan for a bigger place, I understood what you meant about the difference between dreams and escapes." I actually laughed. "Let me guess. He had big plans but no way to fund them?" "Exactly. Everything was going to work out once his investments paid off, once he got that promotion, once his cryptocurrency definitely increased in value." She shook her head. "I'm dating someone my own age now. We have student loans and a small apartment, but at least we're building something real." After she left, my assistant manager whispered, "Was that the girlfriend?" "No," I replied. "That was just another woman who learned the same lesson I did." Speaking of lessons, I gestured toward a young couple examining our designer handbags. "Let's talk about your idea for expanding our accessories line." The boutique had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of independence, resilience, and the power of preparation. Young entrepreneurs often sought my advice, and I always emphasized the importance of protecting their assets. Mark's mother called one last time, not to discuss Mark, but to thank me. "You taught our family an important lesson," she said, "about enabling bad behavior, about making excuses for cruelty. Mark's still living at home, still blaming everyone else for his problems. But we're not defending him anymore. That's your legacy to our family, showing us the difference between supporting someone and enabling them." I thought about that legacy as I reviewed plans for a fourth location. Mark had intended to diminish me, to trade me in for a younger model and take half of everything I'd built. Instead, he had inadvertently pushed me to become even stronger and more successful. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Mark filed another petition to revisit the settlement. The judge dismissed it immediately and ordered him to pay court costs. "Thought you'd enjoy that." I smiled, thinking of him in his childhood bedroom, still trying to rewrite an ending that had been determined the moment he underestimated me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better. 2 years after Mark's cruel text message, I received an invitation to speak at a women's business conference. The topic wasn't divorce or betrayal, it was about building and protecting a successful business. My story had evolved from a cautionary tale to one of inspiration. During the Q&A session, a woman asked, "How do you keep your business and personal finances separate?" "My husband says I'm paranoid, and that marriage means sharing everything." I smiled and replied, "My ex-husband said the same thing, right up until he tried to claim half my business in our divorce. Trust your instincts. Protection isn't paranoia." By then, my boutique chain had grown to 5 locations, each one more successful than the last. The little shop Mark had mocked now employed 30 people and had been featured in several national magazines. Through mutual friends, I heard that Mark had finally moved out of his parents' house into a small apartment above a garage. He had to take a lower-paying job after his former company downsized, eliminating his position during restructuring. His dating profile still listed him as young at heart, though his profile picture was clearly outdated. Ironically, Melissa had become a regular customer at my original boutique location. She had earned her business degree and started her own social media consulting company. "You inspired me," she told me once, showing how a woman can build something lasting instead of falling for empty promises. I kept Mark's cruel text message framed in my office, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of how far I'd come. Below it hung a sign that read, "Success is the best revenge." At the 5-year anniversary celebration of my original boutique, I stood addressing my employees and loyal customers. The space had been transformed from a small shop into the flagship store of a thriving business empire. Mark's mother attended, though I hadn't sent her an invitation. She waited until the crowd thinned and then approached me. "I saw Mark yesterday," she said, smoothing her designer dress, the one she'd bought from my store. "He was talking about his glory days, about the life he could have had. He still doesn't understand that he didn't lose everything in the divorce. He threw it away." I thought about that text message, his casual cruelty, and his assumption that I would crumble without him, that he expected me to beg, to break, to prove him right about my desperation. Instead, I had built something stronger than before. Each new boutique location stood as a testament to what women could achieve when they stopped dimming their light for insecure men. The young saleswoman I had hired last month, ironically also named Melissa, came over with a question about the new inventory system I had implemented. As I explained the process, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the store window. I saw what Mark had failed to see 5 years ago, not a woman getting older, but one getting wiser, stronger, and more successful. His cruel text message had been meant to be an ending. Instead, it had been a beginning, not just for me, but for every woman who heard my story and realized she deserved better than someone else's midlife crisis.